Conflicts always throw up inspirational characters, but this story is about a maverick soldier who lived a real boy's own life and fought the Second World War very much on his own terms. Here was a man who charged the Nazis with a Scottish Highlander's sword, went into battle playing his own bagpipes, and shot a German soldier with a longbow. This is the true story of Fighting Jack Churchill. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, known to his friends as Jack, and to those who fought alongside him as Mad Jack or Fighting Jack, was born in 1906 in Colombo, British Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. His father, from a long-established Oxfordshire family, was an engineer in the British colonial services. And it's worth pointing out that despite his surname and his record in the Second World War, he was not related to Winston Churchill. In 1926, aged 20, Jack passed out of Military College Sandhurst, the officer training college for the British Army, and was commissioned in the 2nd Battalion, the Manchester Regiment. At this time, the 2nd Battalion were serving a 10-year tour of duty in India and Burma. Almost from the word go, Jack Churchill showed his free spirit. Upon completing a signals course in Pune, near Bombay, he decided to make the return journey to Burma on his motorbike. He travelled 1,500 miles across India from Pune to Calcutta, where he took a boat to Rangoon in Burma, before once more mounting his motorbike to journey up country. With roads in Burma in a poor state of repair, he chose to follow the railway lines. And there were moments where he crossed bridges by placing his bike on the rails and taking giant steps from sleeper to sleeper, whilst way below lay the rivers and jungles. Back in Burma, this English officer decided to learn the bagpipes, receiving tuition from a pipe major from the Cameron Highlanders. Practicing the bagpipes in the evening was certainly one way not to make friends and influence people. So too was his maverick style. On one occasion, when it was raining, he turned up on parade as an officer with an umbrella. When the battalion adjutant asked him why he'd turned up with the umbrella, he looked at him totally bemused and said, "Because it's raining, sir." Almost, ask a stupid question, get a stupid answer. 10 years of dreary, monotonous peacetime duties started to grate with Jack Churchill, and in 1936 he resigned from the British Army to seek pastures new. Initially trying his hand at newspaper editing in Nairobi, Kenya, he then turned his hand with some success to acting. His prowess as a bagpiper landed him a small role in the action film The Drum. And despite being an Englishman, he was an accomplished bagpiper. In the 1938 Aldershot Tattoo, he came second out of 70 entries, which isn't bad when he was up against some of the best pipers from Scotland. I said earlier that his family hailed from Oxfordshire, and it was thanks to these connections that he had rowed on the River Thames at Oxford, known locally as the Isis. Just to clarify, he had rowed the river because he was a local, not because he was at the university. Anyway, his rowing skills landed him another film role, this time in the Robert Taylor film A Yank in Oxford. In one scene, Taylor is in a rowing race sitting at stroke, whilst Churchill was at the opposite end of the boat, in bow position. Apart from acting and bagpipe playing, Jack had added another skill to his repertoire: archery. Once again, never a man to do anything by halves, he became so proficient that he represented Great Britain at the 1939 World Archery Championships in Oslo, coming a respectable 26th in the world. But the war clouds were gathering, and in September 1939, when Britain declared war on Germany, he re-enlisted as an officer with his old regiment, the Manchesters, en route to France. Holding the rank of temporary captain, he cut an unconventional character, arriving at the battlefront with his bow and arrows, and a basket-hilted sword, often called a claymore, but actually it's a clay beg, the sort of sword made famous by the heroic Highland warriors of old. When he was asked by a general what on earth he was doing, he responded, "In my opinion, sir, any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." And amazingly, he put this medieval armoury to good use. As the Germans swept through northern France, the Manchesters were forced to fight their way back towards Dunkirk. In May 1940, outside the village of Lepinay, his men ambushed some Germans. Using his sword, he silently signalled to his men to open fire, catching the Germans totally unawares. As the Germans took cover behind a wall, Churchill sneaked up and opened fire. But not with a machine gun or a rifle or a pistol. Oh no, the first the Germans knew of this new attack was when their sergeant fell to the ground with an arrow sticking in him. In the same countryside where the English under Henry V had unleashed their arrows into the French at Agincourt 500 years beforehand, an Englishman went down in the annals of the Second World War as the only soldier to kill an enemy with the longbow. As the retreat to the coast continued, Churchill hitched 6 trucks together to try and rescue a stranded British tank. The effort failed, but he personally then ran to rescue an officer from the tank, receiving the Military Cross for his gallantry. It was the first of a series of decorations that came the way of Fighting Jack Churchill during the Second World War. Having been evacuated from Dunkirk, he arrived back to Britain to a new, exciting challenge. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, as I said, no relative, wanted to set up an unconventional force to fight the Germans, and taking a leaf from his Boer War experiences, the Premier called these units commandos. Unconventional units fighting an unconventional war. Well, this was a godsend for Fighting Jack Churchill. The training took place in the wilds of Scotland. He loved the training, and as he was in the homeland of the bagpipes, he had his pipes sent up to their billet in the former hotel at Largs, and there he insisted on playing them every night. The good news for his fellow commandos was that Jack did take some time off from playing to court Rosamund Denny, the daughter of a Glasgow shipping magnate, and in the spring of 1941 they were married and were to spend the next 55 years together. With their training complete, the commandos went into action in December 1941. Operation Archery, did Churchill suggest the code name? Was the raid on the German-occupied town of Vargso in northern Norway. Jack Churchill was second in command of No. 3 Commando, whose mission was to storm the gun battery on a neighbouring island so that the main force could land unimpeded on mainland in the mainland harbour. Once more, Fighting Jack Churchill rose to the occasion. As their landing craft sped towards the German-occupied island, he stood on the bow, playing on his bagpipes, the March of the Cameron Men. Leaping off at the head of his men, sword in hand, he charged at the startled German position, lobbing a grenade ahead as he went. Not surprisingly, with a crazy mustachioed bagpipe player armed with a sword charging towards them, the Germans surrendered. The commando raid on Vargso was a resounding success. 15,000 tons of Axis shipping was sunk, and over 100 German prisoners were taken back on the return journey to Scotland. An American news crew accompanied the mission, and they captured both the fighting and Churchill playing his pipes on the return journey, whilst his men danced a jig on the deck. For his actions in the raid, he was awarded a second Military Cross. In British military uniform, when you're awarded a second medal, you actually get a bar on your first medal. So described as, in this case, the Military Cross and bar. 2 years later, Churchill was once more in the thick of the action, commanding No. 2 Commando at the Salerno Landings in Italy, where incidentally my grandfather fought. Having helped secure the beachhead, he then led his men inland for a nighttime attack on a tiny village. Due to the thick undergrowth around the settlement, there was no way that they could approach silently, so Churchill formed his men into 6 parallel columns and ordered them to charge simultaneously while shouting, "Commando!" The Germans were completely confused by the shouting from the different directions, and believing themselves to be heavily outnumbered, 136 of them surrendered to the 50-strong British force. Churchill was as ever leading from the front and had outpaced his men. Accompanied only by one other commando, Corporal Ruffle, they charged into the centre of the village or small town. The 2 soldiers took 42 prisoners there, including a 10-man mortar unit, who Churchill had personally charged with his sword. Then the 2 men marched their 42 prisoners back to the Allied lines. Amazingly, the Germans didn't make a break for freedom or challenge their 2 captors. As Churchill later reported, "I maintain that as long as you tell a German loudly and clearly what to do, if you're senior to him, he will cry 'Jawohl' and get on with it enthusiastically and efficiently. That's why They make such marvellous soldiers. For his actions at Salerno in Italy, he received 2 Distinguished Service Orders, DSOs. Next up for Fighting Jack, now temporarily Colonel, was the former Yugoslavia, where the commandos were ordered to make contact with and then support Marshal Tito's partisans on the Dalmatian coast. In May 1944, the commandos under Churchill were ordered to support a combined attack with the partisans by seizing a German-held hill. Under heavy fire, Churchill led his commandos forward, once more playing his bagpipes. Only 6 of them made it to the summit. The Germans counterattacked and a mortar shell landed among the commandos, killing 3 and wounding 2 others. Once more, Churchill's incredible luck continued. He was the only man unscathed. But he was the only man standing, and he knew that there was no way that he could hold off the Germans or retreat downhill with his wounded comrades. And so, he played his bagpipes. Across the battlefield in the Balkans, the haunting strains of the pipes, "Will ye no come back again?" filled the air. Finally, the Germans tossed a grenade in his direction and he blacked out. Jack came to find a German soldier prodding him with a gun. His war was over. Or at least, it was for the moment. But as you can probably guess by now, Jack Churchill wasn't a man who was going to quietly spend the rest of the war in a POW camp. More adventures are on the way. But first he was taken to Berlin, as the Germans thought, with his surname, he was related to Winston Churchill. When they realised that apart from a few film roles, he wasn't a high-value political prisoner, he was carted off to Sachsenhausen concentration camp, where he was held in a compound designated for Allied prisoners of war. In September of that year, Churchill and an RAF officer managed to escape crawling out of the camp through a disused drain. They headed to the Baltic coast, aiming to stow away on a ship heading to neutral Sweden, but they were caught just a few miles short of the port city of Rostock. The recaptured Churchill was now sent to a prisoner of war camp in Austria, far away from the coast, from where, in April 1945, he once more escaped. One evening, as his work detail were returning to the camp, the lights failed. Ever enterprising, he took that opportunity of darkness and confusion to slip away and headed south. For the next 8 days, he covered nearly 150 miles, travelling out of Austria through the Brenner Pass and into Italy. Not far from the city of Verona, he ran into an American armoured unit. Not surprisingly, the Americans were pretty unsure what to make of this dishevelled character who claimed he was a British officer, until he gave them his best Sandhurst salute. The war in Europe was drawing to a close, which for Fighting Jack Churchill was not good news, and he immediately requested a transfer to the Far East, where the bloody war against Japan was still very much on. But by the time he arrived in his old stomping ground of Burma, the atomic bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the Japanese too had surrendered. Churchill lamented, "If it hadn't been for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going for another 10 years. Maybe it was a slightly tongue-in-cheek British sense of humour comment, but maybe deep down he really was a little bit disappointed. The Second World War was over, but Fighting Jack's soldiering wasn't. The following year, 1946, he qualified as a parachutist at the age of 40. He then transferred to the Seaforth Highlanders and was appointed second in command of the 1st Battalion, the Highland Light Infantry, then stationed in the British Mandate territory of Palestine. By now, the British had effectively lost control of the territory, as Arabs and Jews were locked in a civil war that would ultimately lead to the creation of the State of Israel and many of the problems that the region still has to this day. Palestine was the last time that Fighting Jack Churchill would come under fire, although not the last time that he would himself fire, because his eventful life story is not over yet. After Palestine, he returned to a series of military desk jobs in London. Ever the maverick, he used to startle commuters on his train heading home at night when, as they approached his station in Surrey, he would open the window and throw his briefcase out of the train. Now, he might have had the nickname Mad Jack, but he wasn't mad. He was throwing the case into his back garden, so he didn't have to carry it from the station. Ever the maverick and ever the action man, Jack Churchill learned to surf in the 1950s, and in 1955 he became the first person to ever surf the Severn River's tidal bore. I mean, now it's a big sporting event, as it is in several other tidal bores around the world, but Jack Churchill was the first person ever to do it on either the Severn or on any tidal bore for that matter. And as I said, he had one last shot, or should I say, one final string to his bow. Because in 1952, his old acting friend, Robert Taylor, whom he'd rode with in a Yank in Oxford back before the war, called upon his services again. This time, he had a role as an archer, firing from the battlements of Warwick Castle in Taylor's film based upon Sir Walter Scott's classic medieval adventure, Ivanhoe. Jack and Rosamond were married for 55 years. They had 2 sons, and when Jack finally retired from the army in 1959, you could find the 2 of them cruising in his steam launch on the upper reaches of the River Thames. Jack Churchill died in 1996 in Surrey, aged 89. Britain has a knack of throwing up brave soldiers, and also of throwing up eccentrics and mavericks. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, DSO and Bar, MC and Bar, was one of those people. What an incredible, real-life boy's own character. I don't think they make them like him anymore. Fighting Jack Churchill. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. Loads more coming your way, so please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of them. In the meantime, keep well, and I'll see you very soon.